All right, so we're going to make some eyepieces here. And for the lens, I've just got this piece of plastic material that I cut out of a Funko Pop package. A little window in the package. Some good stuff. Obviously, some of it's not usable because it's got glue on it, but certainly good enough for the window there. So that's what I'll be using for that. And then, of course, for the iris itself, we just use this as a template and then actually cut it out of black material. I think that looks better. You could color it in with a marker, or I could have made the part so that it prints black from the printer, but it just doesn't look as good, I think. I think the black paper, just the kind of the matte sheen, looks much better for that sort of thing. So we'll cut that out as a template. We'll just lightly tape it to here and then use that as a kind of trace the template and then cut it out of the black paper. And then this piece is something I created that you can use to use as a light shield. So if you're going to be lighting the ghost, then putting the light behind it, some of the light might get through the black paper. And so instead of having it kind of glow around the edges here, I made this little shape. You cut out the diamond, you put this behind it. Again, you can cut that out of black paper, you cut it out of something thicker like chipboard. And then you put that behind it, and that'll block even more light from getting through, just except for the part where it's supposed to go through. There are probably other ways to do that too. In fact, one of the things that I've found that I like best for, I've recently found that I like best for light blocking is this aluminum tape. Stuff is fantastic. It really easy to work with, sticks really well, and it completely blocks all light. So you could, once you cut this shape out of the black paper, you could put this on the back side of it. And actually, you could even do that before you cut it out of the paper. Put that on the back side. Then as you cut, you're cutting out this shape, and everything else is going to have this aluminum tape on the back. Completely blocks all the extra light coming through except for where you cut it out. So I think that might be a great way to go. You could also use some kind of thick craft paint or something to block the light. I've done that as well. In fact, I kind of did a combination of these things when I built this one. So when I turn it on here, there's the light there. I used a light blocking panel like that, but I was still not really happy with how much light was coming through the parts that this wasn't blocking. So just around the very edge of the diamond shape plus the parts in the middle, there was still enough light coming through there that I didn't care for that. So I actually just ended up using some black craft paint painted on the back of this piece here, which just ended up blocking some more light, and it turned out pretty nice. Although now looking back, if I could have used that aluminum tape, if I had thought of using that aluminum tape, it would have been probably much easier to do it, fewer steps involved. And then for the eye itself, if you're not going to be lighting the model, then you could just cut a circle out of some blue paper. Something like this might work. That's a pretty close match to what I've got there. Or I've also got some blue plastic. This is what I ended up using on this one that actually is lighted. I've got this, from a plastic bag that we got, like a grocery bag, and really thin blue plastic. I just cut some of that. I think I might have even doubled it up. I can't remember if I did 2 layers of that. Whatever you can find. You could use some like thin copy paper or vellum or something that's either colored blue, or you could use a marker or watercolors or something to make it blue. You might have to experiment if you can't find something like this. You might have to experiment and see what you can do. I just suggest you try it out, try some things out. Cut this shape out so you've got it, and then actually pass some light through it to see what you got. You could just use a flashlight behind it, see how it looks. But that's only going to give you a vague idea of what it looks like. You if you're going to be lighting it, I would actually get the actual lighting you're going to use and get that set up so that you can pass that light through, so you know exactly how bright it's going to be, what the color is going to look like, so you can make a good choice on what material you want to use for that. All right, so for this one, I'm not going to be lighting it, so I am just going to use the blue paper, and I'll just cut a circle the same diameter as that, put that behind the black, and that'll be good. So let's cut the clear plastic circle first. Cut it out of there. So the idea here is the idea is to use the outside diameter of this piece here, which would be, where the tips of these, the inside tips of these little negative tabs are. Let me show you one that hasn't been cut out yet. I obviously cut this one out first before doing that, so that makes it a little trickier for myself. So what we're talking about here is the outside diameter, which is that dotted or dashed circle there. It's what you want to use as a template. If you've already cut it out, like I said, you can use, that corresponds to the inside tips of these negative tabs here. You could use that. You could just measure across and use that diameter and use a compass. Not a bad way to go. But since I've got one that I've got, it's not a printed one out here that I haven't cut out yet, I'll go ahead and use that just to kind of trace it out. And again, you're not going to be able to see this since it is going to be hidden. Flip that around this way. Just going to use a little bit of tape to hold that in place, and I'm just going to kind of trace that circle with a pen. I always print multiple copies of my parts sheet just for backups in case I mess something up. Or for situations like this where it's useful to reference a part that you've already cut out and used. So, well, that won't do. The tape's in the way. There we go. Okay, so good enough. That'll keep it from moving around. And then I don't think this pin's going to ride on this plastic very well. Yeah, it's not bad, actually. Let's go ahead and just trace around there. Doesn't have to be the best circle you've ever drawn, because it's all going to be inside. Don't want this edge to be visible. There's a little bit of wiggle room, so if you make it a little bit too big or a little too small, that shouldn't matter. It should fit just the same. But you do want to make it as big as you can without going over. It obviously still needs to fit, and the bigger it is, the more area you have to actually add glue without having any glue show through. So, okay, so we've got that marked. I doubt that pen is going to be fast to that plastic, so I don't want to touch that, or it'll just smear. Yeah, see that? Just wipes right off. So probably the easiest way to cut that is just going to be scissors. So I'll go ahead and cut around it to make it easier to work with. Set that aside for future projects. And here we go. Just follow my cut line. Doesn't have to be the best circle I've ever cut. And obviously we can test fit it, so if it's a little too big, we can trim it down. Yeah, one thing I should have mentioned is when you're choosing your piece of plastic, you want to find one that doesn't have scuffs and scratches on it. I didn't actually check that spot before I... Looks okay. There's going to be some ink. I have to use some alcohol to clean that off so it doesn't... That's coming off. There we go. So it doesn't actually end up showing, or I don't smear it across the part that does show. And then, of course, we're going to be handling this. I'm going to get fingerprints all over it. Once I get it glued in, that's going to have fingerprints on it. Just before we seal it up from the inside, I want to make sure I clean that off so there's no fingerprints on the inside. Because once it's sealed up, can't get to it, can't clean it off, and it'd be a shame to have it ruined by a big nasty fingerprint in the middle of it. Okay, so there's that. Hard to see. I might lose track of that. Let's test fit it. You know what? I've got blue ink on my fingers because I wiped it off. I'm going to go clean that off so I don't get it on things I don't want it on. All right, let's test fit that, make sure it's going to work. Yep, fits nicely. See that? Yeah, I think that'll be just fine. Okay, so that's the lens. Next piece in the instructions. Let's just go ahead and do the iris. So I'll cut that out. I'm just using scissors because I don't care about the quality of this edge. I feel I can get a better circle cut with a knife than I can with scissors. It's actually not too bad. But anyway, in this case, like I said, don't really care about the edge too much, just as long as it fits. And then so there's that. We'll leave those for now, but I've affixed this to the black paper. So what I did on the other one is I actually printed this out of just regular copy paper instead of the cardstock I used for the rest of the model. And then I think I used some spray adhesive or something to glue that on. And then I just left it there, cut out the black around the outside and then cut out the shape in the middle. And then I just left the copy paper, I just put it on the back. Probably do that again, actually. Yeah, might as well. So let's just glue this down. Whoa, that was a lot of glue. Way too much glue. Not really going for a great bond here. We just need it to hold well enough while we cut the shape out. If it ends up popping off when we're done, we don't care. Just kind of spread that thin. One problem with doing it this way instead of the spray adhesive is that this glue does have water in it, and the paper will absorb it. You can see it's already curling, and it's going to end up getting a little bit wrinkled. But that's okay. We don't care too much about this as long as it's good enough that we can use it as a stencil for cutting out this shape. That's all we care about. All right, glue that on. Ooh, lots of glue. That might not ever be coming off of there. As long as it doesn't wrinkle the blue or the black paper. If there's enough moisture that it starts warping that, then I'm not going to be happy with that. We'll see. So far so good. Doesn't look too bad. Okay. Let that dry for a minute so it doesn't slide around when we try to cut it. And then might as well cut out the blue one while we're waiting. Just just want to cut the same diameter. If I'd used a knife to cut that, I could have just used that as a template. Get most of the way there and then freehand the rest. We'll see how that goes. Could cut that one. I'm not planning to light this one, but yeah. See how this goes. All right. Well, let's just do that. Just line that up. Yeah. Then use the rest of that circle. There we go. Good enough. This is another scissor job, I think. Now you might be wondering if you could use this circle as a template for cutting the clear plastic for the lens. But they are actually different diameters. As you can, let's see if we can see that on camera. I hold that up, try and center it on there. Kind of see that, different diameters. This ends up being slightly smaller than this, and that's for the simple reason that the iris is set further back into the eye than the lens is. The lens goes all the way to the front there and glues onto that piece there, but this is designed so that there should be a gap between the lens and the iris. The iris doesn't glue directly onto the plastic. You could do that, but it looks more accurate, and I think it just looks better to have a bit of a gap between the plastic lens and the iris. So so it's further back, and so we increase the diameter, so we make it as big as we can, so that, you know, when you're looking at it at like an angle, you're not going to look in there and actually see the edge, you know, the cut edge of that iris. It's big enough that it should go all the way out to the inside of the sphere. So that's the reason for that. So, and if you cut to that, this is barely big enough to, this plastic lens is barely big enough to fit in there. So if you ended up cutting it bigger to that size, it wouldn't actually rest all the way flat onto that piece of paper in there. It would contact the edges and leave, it would install crooked or wrinkled. You don't want to do that. So all right, so there's our blue. I'm just going to stick that in there for now to keep track of it. This is probably dry enough to work with. Feels a little bit warped on the back. Yeah, you can see that, can't you? If you look at the reflection, that is a little warped. Not sure if I like that. No, I don't like that. Okay. I'm going to do that over again. Set that aside as a backup. It's possible that when this dries, when that moisture evaporates off there, it might go back to the shape it was, but it might not. It might dry even more warped. So I think maybe what I'll do, I don't want to mess with the spray adhesive right now. That would work, but it's messy. What I could do is I could just cut that out and cut the actual iris shape out of this paper template, and then hold it on there and then just trace the shape. I'm trying to decide how well I could do that if it ended up looking good once it's done. So if I even move it a little bit, No, that might not be a good idea, because once I cut that out, that paper is going to be really thin. It's not going to hold its shape. And especially if I'm tracing right up against it with a pencil, that's going to tend to distort the shape, and it's going to deform the paper. Yeah, I'm not going to do that. Yep, spray adhesive it is. I'm going to print this on regular copy paper, though, because it's going to be easier to work with than this thicker cardstock. So I'll go do that. All right, so I've used some spray adhesive, that stuff. Just sprayed it on back of this. Like I said, I printed this out of copy paper, just it's easier to work with. Got it on there, just wait till it's tacky. Then so we go ahead and let's cut this out. Cut out the middle shape first. It'll be easier to control everything when I've got this big piece of paper. Just looking at that inner circle, if I cut it that big, that's going to be very thin paper right there. I'm afraid that'll break or deform and just not look good. So I might have to cut this inside circle just a little bit smaller than what I've indicated on the lines here. Let me take a look and see what I did on this one. Yeah. Looks like I cut that circle smaller than what the pattern says. Yep, let's do that. I just don't want that to deform or break. So, okay. Okay, now let's see if I can get these middle shape pieces out. One nice thing about what I'm doing here, where I'm not going to be lighting it, I'm just going to be gluing it to that blue paper. As long as it holds together long enough for me to get it on there, that'll strengthen it, and it won't be an issue after that, but I got to get it to that point without it falling apart. If you're going to be lighting it, the only thing you really have to reinforce that is whatever you're putting behind it to, color it with. If it's this thin plastic, what I did before when I lit that one is, like I said, I use this plastic. I don't remember if I used 1 or 2 layers of it. I just, whatever looked good, that's what I did. But then I also used, I cut this out of a chipboard, I think, and I also sandwiched in, it looked a little too weird just having the lights coming straight through that plastic. It wasn't diffuse enough. I was actually seeing individual spots from the LEDs that were behind it. So I wanted to diffuse the light a little bit. So I think what I ended up doing was just using some like tissue paper, like nasal tissue paper, facial tissue paper, and did like 1 or 2 thin layers of that and sandwiched them along with the plastic in between the piece, this light shield piece that I cut out of chipboard, and then just another piece that I cut out of cardstock, so I could cut this one out as well. And then I just glued those two together, and it sandwiched those pieces together. Since these, this is really floppy stuff, and the tissue is really floppy, it needed some reinforcement to hold it in place, so I just sandwiched it between those two pieces of card, and that worked really well. Ugh, kind of ratty looking. See if I can clean that up a little bit. Let's go ahead and finish cutting this out. Again, we can employ the scissors because this edge is not visible. There we go. Yeah, that looks pretty good. Except for the little fuzzy spots, I'll clean those up. I think that'll look just fine on our blue paper. Nice. Alright, so I cleaned up the little fuzzy edges. Looks pretty good now. And also on the back, I just ran a black marker around the edges just in case there was any little bit of white peeking out, and making sure I got the actual cut edge inside. And now I think I'll go ahead because this is so fragile, I don't want to take any more risk of breaking out that metal piece. I'm going to go ahead and glue this onto the backing of the blue paper. I'm going to use the craft glue. Worry about the warping, since we had such bad warping on this one here. See how curled that is? That's bad. Maybe I'll use super glue. I don't have as much issue with warping with super glue or CA glue. One thing that can happen with CA glue is as it dries, it kind of leaves, I don't know, almost like a smoke effect. Like there's vapors that come off of it that get deposited on things around it, so you can see kind of like whitening around where it will glue. But I don't need to actually add a lot of glue here. I think I'll probably just put a couple spots out towards the edges here, because, you know, if it does that smoke effect on the outside, that doesn't matter. And I'll just maybe just put the tiniest. No, you know what? I don't think I'm even going to add any glue to that middle portion. I'll just add enough glue around the rim to hold it in place against that paper. And then I'll just have to be careful when I'm working with this until I actually get it installed and it's protected behind the plastic sheet. Then I just have to be careful not to touch that. Yeah, I think that'll be what I do here. So let's go ahead and get some CA glue here. All right, so the next piece, like I said, we don't want to glue this iris directly onto the plastic lens. We want to have a gap between them. So it should be set back a little ways. So the idea is we could cut a ring of material that's about 2 millimeters thick. You know, some chipboard or something like that. But we really don't need to go all the way around. We just need maybe like 3 or 4 spacers that we can put in there that'll set it back that far. And I think that'll be good enough. So I've got some chipboard that might be thick enough. I'll check that. Might have to double up. Or I could find some plastic or some thick corrugated cardboard. I'll see what I can find. Alright, found a few things that could work. Like I said, you could use some chipboard, which is just this kind of thin non-corrugated cardboard stuff. This is a little bit under 1 millimeter thick, so I'd have to double that up. So you know, that's easily doable if that's what you've got. Also got this other kind of really thin corrugated fiberboard cardboard that this is almost exactly 1 millimeter thick, so double up something like that as well. I just got that from some piece of packaging. And then this is a piece of just a flat, this is a flat from a cardboard box. This is cardboarded fiberboard, and this is about 2 millimeters thick. So rather than having to double something up, I think I'll just try and use this and see how I like it. So like I said, you could cut a ring to go around there, but that's probably just more work than it's really worth. All we really need to do is set it back, and we're gonna install the spacer far enough to the side that hopefully you shouldn't be able to see anything from the side there. So I think what I'll do is I'll just cut out just like some little small rectangles, and we'll probably do 4. You could do 3 or 4. I'll probably do 4, and we'll see how it goes. Maybe not. The stuff really doesn't stay together very well, and it's a little, I mean, it's fine on a big piece like this, but when you cut it into small enough pieces like what we need here, ends up being pretty squishy. So I don't think I'd be able to get a consistent spacing inside of there. The stuff, I don't think it's going to do it. So I think we might have the same problem here with this corrugated. It is a smaller scale, so it'd probably be better, but still probably not great. So I think what I'll do is I'll just double up some chipboard. So I'm just testing here to see if I can see that spacer from the outside. I might have to actually glue down the plastic because it's just getting pushed all over the place. So for that, I'm going to need super glue. This glue will not bond that plastic sheet to the paper. So CA glue, it'll have to be well, I guess we'll see how that holds. Give it some more time to dry. It seems to have bonded in a few spots. Not all the way around, but yeah, we'll see how that holds up. Alright, now that that's not going to move around, let me just drop that in there. Hold it in place and check and see if I can see the spacer from the side. No, I really can't. Good. All right. I think that'll work. I think I'll go ahead and color it black anyway. At least the parts that would ever possibly be seen. Oh yeah, that looks good. Okay, one last thing. I'm going to test to make sure this ball fits. Just to make sure that there's not too much stuff going on in the front with the eye. It's going to make it be over thickness. But that looks fine. Obviously, I'll have to get that iris centered on just right when it comes time to glue it in. Oh yeah, there's plenty of room there. Yep. All right, good. Let's see, I'm gonna kind of push on this window, this lens, to just make sure that it's actually on there good enough. It's not gonna just pop off at the slightest pressure. Had some cracking there, but I don't feel any, doesn't feel loose. Got pushed out a little bit there on that inside ring. See if I can get that pushed back in without doing too much damage. I just have to live with that. I'm afraid if I push too hard on that, it's just gonna make it worse. So I put a little too much pressure on that when I was gluing the lens in, and it kind of crushed that inner ring a little bit. Oh no, I just smeared super glue onto there. Oh. Well, that's ruined. Yep, there's no way to clean that off of there. Man, okay, well, I'm gonna have to redo that. Let's pop it out of there. So if you're going to build one of these, be aware of that danger. Don't want to get super glue onto the plastic where you can actually see it. And I was just running my finger along the outside there, and there was some super glue that was still uncured out there, and it just wiped it right onto there. Ruined it. Let's do it again. Carefully popping that off of there. Okay, I mean it took a little bit of doing to get that plastic off there, so that gives me confidence that it will bond strong enough once it's completely cured that it's not going to just come undone at the slightest pressure. So it gives me confidence that the super glue is actually going to work. Let's get rid of that. I'm going to set this to the side so I don't actually accidentally get super glue on that where I don't want it. All right, do this again. Let's see, where did I use for... There it is. Check for any scuffs or scratches on the plastic that I'm going to use. Looks okay. Make sure there's no wet super glue on my fingers. I'm just putting the glue up in the corner from between the flat circular face there that the plastic is going to rest on and where it bends up and meets the inside of the sphere face. That way it's the place where it's likely to actually contact the plastic but also be as far away from the visible portion as possible, just so that there's no, when I actually place the plastic down, it's going to squish the glue between the clear plastic sheet and the paper, and so some of it's going to move inward towards the visible part. So I want it to make it have to go as far as it can before it actually becomes visible. Also, again, in case it does the clouding thing, that'll be again as far away from what's visible as possible. All right, here we go again. Be very careful. Whoa, almost dropped it. Jeez. Let's check the flatness with the reflection of the light. Oh, that's actually a lot better than the last one was. The last one had a bit of a buckle in it. Slight warp that you could see in the reflection, but this time it's much better. But this time, I am going to let it sit and not touch it until I am sure all of the glue is cured. Here we go. Flatness check again. Yep, still pretty good. Looks like I might have warped it a little bit further there with that application of pressure, but still acceptable. All right, setting it over there, not going to touch it. All right, so let's finish assembling the eye. I have to say, the way that I built the iris on this prototype model, it was quite a process. It was very custom, and it was just sort of a one-off deal. I was just figuring out how to do it, how to actually get it to work. And what I ended up doing just it's not very user-friendly. It's not easy to explain to someone how to do and to write in instructions and to set up the parts and everything. So I had to do some redesign on the way that the eye is set up. So this is much simpler than it was before. And even now I'm still kind of tweaking it. So my original intention was to have you apply glue to these spacers and then glue those to the plastic lens. But the more I thought about that, the craft glue that I use will not work on the plastic. It just won't bond to it. And so we would have to end up using the CA glue, which is what we did for bonding the plastic to the front part of the body here. And the idea of just putting CA glue there and trying to drop this in here and move it around without accidentally getting CA glue on the back of that lens and just ruining it. It was just, no, it wasn't working. I didn't like the idea. And I was also worried about, like I mentioned, that smoke effect that CA glue has. So even though these spacers are set back far enough that you can't see them from the outside, they're not that far back there. I mean, if I just shift this a little bit, there it is, you can see it. So it's only just beyond visibility there. And I worry that the vapors coming off of that CA glue as it cures would just cloud the inside of the plastic lens. So yeah, just the more I thought about using the CA glue there, it was just not a good idea. So what I decided to do instead was just, the spacers are good. We'll still use the spacers. We need them to give us that gap, that offset of the iris, but we're just not going to glue at this point. Instead, what I decided to do was redesign this piece here. Let me pull out the original version that I had. Was just the circle with the diamond cutout, and this I explained in another part of the video that this is for a template to use for light blocking if you're going to light the eye. But I decided to go ahead and let's just make use of this piece and add these tabs on, and what we'll do is we'll install this piece. We'll insert the iris just like we were going to before, but we're just not going to glue it there. Instead, we'll take this piece, cut it out, and then we'll just put that right behind it. We'll actually glue this piece onto the back of the blue paper here, and then those tabs will just go out and contact the side of the body. So what we can do, cut this out, glue it to the back of here, drop it in here, and then just kind of push it from behind until we get it, we want to get it centered and pushed up against the window, you know, and square with the window, so we don't want it to be like crooked like that or anything. Obviously that's a huge exaggeration, but we do want to have it, pushed as far forward as it can go and centered on the eye. And then once it's centered, we just glue down those tabs that are going to be reaching out and touching the side of. We can just glue 1, 2 of them, let those dry so it stays in place, and then once it's dry, flip it around and glue the last 2. And that should hold the iris in place. I think the only trick with doing this that we'll have to watch out for is it might, since we're kind of pushing this, these tabs might kind of slightly bend out and have some spring to them, and they might want to pull the iris back away from the lens. So we'll have to watch out for that. There might be enough that I don't know, there might be enough pressure on it that it's not going to do that. We can test that out before we glue anything. And if it is wanting to do that, what we'll do is we'll just find out where we could put a bend, right at where it contacts the wall, and have the, so it'll essentially be going out flat, and then right as it contacts the wall, bend the tab up, and then we'll just glue the tab to it, and then it won't have any bend to it that's going to try and maybe might spring it backwards. So I think this is going to work, and I think this is definitely going to be easier for other people to do. The instructions are quite simple. Let's give it a try and see how it works. So I put some glue tabs on here with some bend lines, but I think just to make sure we're avoiding any potential issues of the spring back, I'm not going to score those just yet. Let's go ahead and cut this out and get it glued on there, and then we'll figure out exactly where those bend lines need to be. If you're lighting the eye, then you might still want to put some kind of light blocking, either use this as a template to cut this from black paper or chipboard, something thick that's going to block light, or use like aluminum tape or paint, whatever. Okay, so I've already cleaned the inside of that, so I'm going to try to avoid touching that plastic as much as I can. If I haven't mentioned that before, very important to go ahead and make sure you get that cleaned of any debris, fingerprints, before we do this step of sealing up the iris. We're not going to be able to get a chance to clean that after this, so keep that in mind. Okay, so if you are using this for light blocking, then you'll want to kind of hold that up to the light or shine some light behind it. Hopefully this doesn't throw out the camera. I don't know if you can see that. This paper is obviously not good for using if you're going to be lighting this. It does not transmit a lot of light at all. But if you are going to be lighting it, you'll want to make sure you get the diamond on this white piece here aligned with that diamond in the front there. I'm not going to worry about that. Obviously I've got this blue paper in here, so, and it doesn't really matter as far as where these tabs are lined up. That's of no importance at all. Of course, when we go to actually align the iris, we will want to align the iris with up and down on here, but it's where the tabs end up. They'll work fine no matter where they end up. So, all right, let's go ahead and put those on there. All right, here goes this. Yeah, so naturally it wants to just pull that back, right? So what we have to do is we have to push this forward, which is going to end up bending those tabs a little bit. And so yeah, I'm worried that if we don't put a bend line there, then even after we glue those in, that's going to tend to pull the iris back away from. So we are going to want to put a bend line there. Now, Do we trust the bend line that I marked on there? Let's see if that's right. Well, let's find out. I'll find out so you don't have to. See that? How much of a bend's on there? Let's drop it in, get a feel for the fit. Okay, that's still off quite a, it's still pushed back away from the lens quite a bit. I don't know if you can see how far that's deflecting when I push on it. Still quite a ways. So now we know those bend lines are not in the correct spot. Now, this may vary for you because your spacers might be a different thickness than mine. I just doubled up some chipboard, which ended up being less than 2 millimeters, which is really what this was designed. I designed that gap to be 2 millimeters, and so you know, with varying thicknesses of plastic, varying thicknesses of spacers, and even varying thicknesses of the what you use to construct this iris out of, that's going to vary. So you can try these lines, see if they'll work for you. If you're closer to that 2 millimeter gap, then you might that might work for you, but that's not going to work for me. So I'm going to have to adjust each of those bend lines. Oh, that's much closer. Just checking that that's pretty close to center, and there's almost no give on that. There's a little bit, but it doesn't feel like the give at these tabs. It feels like the iris pushing against the plastic. So I think that's good. As long as I can get that centered, I think that'll be nice. Yep. Okay, I like that. So what we'll do is we'll get that centered. And so the way I've designed this is the seam runs along the bottom of the Ghost. So you'll want to make sure that the iris is lined up vertically like that. So the little I don't know, bars that are holding that central diamond in place are vertical. They're not supposed to be horizontal. That's not the way the Ghost is designed. So something like that, I think. So I kind of lined up, put the lines on my cutting mat behind it, and lined up one of the vertical lines with right down the center of those two circles, and then kind of judged the verticality of the iris. So now I think it's more vertical. I'm just adjusting the centering, trying to adjust the centering without throwing off, without twisting it. Okay, so I think I've got it just right. I want to hold on to that without letting it slip. Now you will want to be careful that, see how I'm holding that? I'm trying to put pressure on the front and the back just to keep it in place, keep it from twisting, but I'm also kind of touching the side here. So if I'm squeezing that sphere and putting it out of shape significantly, then tacking these to the side could introduce some warping. But I don't think I'm really touching it hard enough to deform things, deform the whole sphere significantly. So just a thing to be aware of, something to think about. Could even just hold it against the table if you could transfer it smoothly enough without shifting anything. That way you can just put pressure right on the eye only and not on the body. Okay, I'm just going to hold that for a minute to let that glue do its thing. Okay, I think those have bonded sufficiently. Let's just double check to make sure that's still vertical and centered. And doing my trick with the lines on my cutting mat again. Yep, that looks vertical. Centered. Yeah, I like it. I think I did a good job there. Okay, so now let's glue the last two tabs. Okay. That. Gotta say, that works great. I'm glad I went with this method instead of what I was thinking of doing before. Got a big old fingerprint on there, but that's on the outside.